Perfect. Right. Hi, Sally. Thank you for joining me. It's great to have you, to be honest. You probably don't remember me, but I think a couple of years ago, I was one of the cohorts on the co-action Passivhaus design course. And yeah, I found I mean, all the sessions were great, but your sessions as well, fantastic. And I feel privileged to have the time for you to have the time to talk with me all things Passivhaus. So welcome. I think maybe to start with, Sally, maybe like a little bit about your background, how you got into Passivhaus. I know that you've been an advocate, and I know that you've been doing Passivhaus for quite a lot of years and have a lot of experience. So yeah, I think it would be interesting to just understand your journey to this point.
Oh, lovely. Thank you, Peter. I definitely do remember you because it was we still have the number of people that are coming from a contracting background, or I guess the kind of delivery side of things background is unusual, and we get very excited about having the kind from our perspective. I was actually just talking to some university lecturers about the need for them to be, they were teaching architecture from a variety of different universities, and talking about the need for them to, what's so good about the designer course is getting into the building services. And they were like, oh, but we're not used to, should we be telling our students that they should be commenting on this stuff? And I was like, yes, we definitely need that. So the kind of having advocates, or like the level of understanding throughout the whole of the industry, is kind of part of what I'm interested in. So yes, absolutely. So I started off my career doing building services. I actually had a little bit of a go at doing automotive, and I built the rear suspension for a kit car, designed it and built it. But going into automotive, you are designing like tiny little bushes and things like this. It felt like, whereas buildings, you had far more autonomy, like you were designing the whole thing and it was your responsibility. And I really saw the opportunity for change. I completely didn't link this up with the fact that my dad had built houses that were all his idea about what low energy was throughout I was brought up on building sites that were kind of half finished, where we ran out of money and then had to wait a bit and kind of but each one was a real demonstration of what we should be doing. So back in 1990, when I was 10, we were doing, he built a masonry wall construction that had a massive big full fill cavity of, I think it was like, I don't know, let's say 200 mil, which at that time was absolutely massive, with plastic wall ties to avoid any thermal bridging that he had to specially ship in from, I don't know, Denmark or somewhere like this. I mean, everyone thought it was completely bonkers. And this is like all the ACB law, and he was completely bonkers. And then there was lots of green oak buildings, and so he built an airtight timber frame with I-beams and with all of the green oak inside of the airtightness line. So things which and also one of the first MVHRs in that as well. So things that he had tried out, and there's various other iterations of building, including lots of refurbishment as well and retrofit, including the warm office here, which is an Enefit, which we did in 2013. But this was around, I don't know, it must have been around 2008. He started making noises about, so yeah, I'd gone into working as building services engineer and doing lots of but kind of work, because I was down in the southwest of England. We did lots of really weird stuff. So I did like a crocodile swamp exhibit and lots of weird, fantastic National Trust sites with very, kind of amazing artifacts that needed careful control on them. So lots of things that were quite odd and different. And meanwhile, he was starting making noises about retiring, but he had always worked for himself, even though he was part of this fantastic collaboration that was the ACB, so loads of knowledge sharing. And he'd always been driven by what he thought was interesting, and this great kind of thirst for theoretical knowledge, and also a real desire to apply it and really understand the practical part of it. Okay, and this was I just suddenly got that actually him retiring and not telling anyone about all this stuff was absolutely critical. So it all kind of happened a bit fast, but we said we can fund ourselves for a year just to see if we can work together. And we didn't really have any projects or any real idea about what it was. And at the same time, there were Nick Grant and others in the Passivhaus community, at the ACBE community, had gone over and kind of they expected to be going over and looking at the Passivhaus standard and going like, oh, this is a load of rubbish. And they were actually like, this is kind of what we've been working towards, or all the things that we're learning on our buildings, this stuff, it's like they're doing the same thing, but they're just a bit ahead of us. So there felt like there was a huge synergy, and the more they did that, they kind of dug into it, they're like, oh my god, they've looked at this thing too, and they've done these they've built various social housing developments and done loads of post occupancy, and they were like, that really fits with our understanding of the world. So it kind of it felt like it was an opportunity for us to. So anyway, all this kind of came together, and we hadn't really anticipated that our business was going to be like passive housey. And that never really has been our ambition, but it happens to be a really good fit for most of the projects that we work on. So that's kind of where it all started from. And we started working together, and we got a couple of projects which were going for Passivhaus, and that was fantastic learning experience our first one was a social housing development, and we had various other low energy projects that were going on. And very soon after that, I was really interested in education buildings. I'd done a lot of that historically and had really understood had a good kind of real niggle about the performance gap in those buildings, and particularly an understanding of the impact of the indoor environment on learning.
Like school specifically, or just generally?
School.
Education?
I mean, education generally, but schools particularly was something that there was various bits of research that, I guess, because I've been designing naturally ventilated schools, and then there was some work that Exeter Uni had done where they'd gone and had a look at some of them, not necessarily the ones that I'd designed, but things that they could have been my design, and just demonstrating how awful the air quality was and things like this. And so this was quite a novel thing in 2010. And so I was really trying to find also some education buildings. So we were already trying to build up a kind of breadth of different types of buildings that this could be applied to. And that kind of just continued. And then rather annoyingly, Dad said that we'd set up the consultancy, and we were like, oh, there's actually something in this. And it felt like it kind of had some momentum. And then the Passivhaus Institute came out with this designer qualification and course. And some people from the UK went and had a look at it. And we had a look through the training material. We didn't actually go and do the course, but had a look through the material. And Dad was like, this is awful. We cannot have this rollout in the UK, because it's not. We're not talking about the constructions that we use and the methods that we do, and it's not encompassing the learning that we have from our projects.
Wow.
And
what kind of things in particular, like what were the real standout, this is not UK?
So particularly the construction methods just weren't really, they weren't things that we felt comfortable with. So there was a lot of concrete frame with external wall insulation, which some people have made work in the UK, but I'd certainly say for us down in the southwest with a huge amount of driving rain is just very, very difficult as a construction system. And it's not what they're used to. So it was really trying to and we also wanted to pull into it our practical learning of just how hard it is to do a beam and block floor, which is a common way of building houses. And it's still, we have projects that are live at the moment that are Passivhaus projects that are doing that. So it's possible, but we also wanted to kind of really pull apart those the reality of doing it and showing real examples from the UK. And I thought this was, so he was like, I think we should rewrite this course for the UK and also do it in a way that is trying to engage them. So we thought it was a really fantastic syllabus. And they'd done a great job of it. They'd taken 3 years to do it. And Dad was like, right, I reckon we can do this. And I thought this was an absolutely terrible idea. I thought, I was like, we've only just got a consultancy up and going, and now you want to go and put this onto it as well. So in his usual way, this also was he said, well, if we're going to do it, we need the whole team. And this was where the kind of collaboration came in. And he managed to, we had this a meeting at EcoBuild of a load of people, mostly AECB, but other people that were at the forefront of low energy design and construction at that time. And the majority of them said yes, that they were willing to do it. We rewrote the course in 3 months and then delivered it to our first cohort. And that was kind of the start of co-action, which then so it was done. We were very grateful. We got some funding from Saint-Gobain and also Rationale, which was so nice. It kind of really helped to because a lot of the people that were involved were self-employed, and also there just wasn't lots of money sloshing around. So having that support was just enabled it to actually happen and kick off. And we had this group of trainers then that were delivering, who'd written it and who were delivering this training, who'd really done it in the UK. And that was a big part of what we always wanted to do, was having practitioners talking about it. And that over time got to a point. So to start with, it was like Warm was the kind of soft pillow of the finances that kind of made it all work and did all the back of house stuff. And whilst that was quite small, that worked really well. And then around about 2019, it just got too big. And we realised that the aspirations we really wanted this to be something which was very much going out to the mainstream, that wasn't just about talking in our lovely little bubble of Passivhaus geeks. We needed to take this out, and we needed to get a further engagement. And that's where co-action then turned into a not-for-profit.
Okay.
So Warm, the consultancy, has been going over those years and has, I guess so we always kind of anticipated that it would be, that we'd have the ability to change what we do. And particularly, and I think that's really exciting, because there's always new problems coming along, and there's some really exciting ones and terrifying at the moment, which some of them I've got a good idea about what I think the solution might be, and a lot of them I really haven't got a clue. And I think that's is a great place to be. Whereas a lot of the co-action stuff, I'm like, we've just got to go out there and throw our understanding about it. And Warm, I think, is somewhere where I always want to have it's always about the application of it and pondering what is the right thing to do, and what things should we be really worrying about, I guess.
Wow, no, that's fantastic. I love that journey. I think so it's interesting you say about 2019 and how you found that it's almost, I guess the demand maybe outgrew what you could do and what you could deliver, and I definitely see. So I did the course, I think 23 or a couple of years ago, and it's pretty clear from the amount of I guess cohorts you have per year. The demand is, I'm guessing it's growing and growing, and you've been able to use remote tools and remote learning to a really great level. And in terms of the way the course is set out, I think something like 8 or 10 trainers on different modules, which again was great, because kind of ties into what you're saying about you get all these people together, and you want to push that knowledge out. So I found the course fantastic. I think it was only like 6 weeks. It was like solid studying for 6 weeks, and like I had to rely on my wife a little bit more on the childcare side for that time, but it was definitely worth it. And so my experience was fantastic, and I suppose it would be interesting to see from your point of view how you've seen the demand for Passivhaus training, but also I suppose more widely how you've seen the development of Passivhaus in briefs and more projects that want to go for that target. And I suppose because initially it was probably more of a specific client wanted to do a specific project, maybe on a low scale, and now we're seeing, you know, businesses like ourselves who focus on large schemes trying to get into that as well. So yeah, what are your general reflections on that kind of on the progress, let's say?
I love that, Peter. That's like a big bag of different things going on. Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, I think
Take
no,
what
it's
you want from
really,
the bag.
I think it's really, I mean, this is part of it, isn't it? Is that there's just so much, and trying to work out where to focus attention and effort and everything else. It's kind of is a it's there's a lot going on. So I think in terms of the training, one of the things, I guess, the changes that we're trying to make at the moment is talk about it as in lessons from Passivhaus, as opposed to it just being applicable to people that are doing Passivhaus buildings, because I think that there is I think that we're doing a massive disservice to our industry by not having this kind of knowledge out there. And the Passivhaus designer course isn't suited for everyone, and that's why we've got a range of other things that kind of do really well in terms of picking up different parts of where we're seeing the real kind of weak spots, or kind of the humps that need getting over. And I think there's a lot that I think in terms of being able to do the rollout and the scale, some of the really basic knowledge is incredibly helpful in just making sure that those lessons learned. And this is why the importance of like having practitioners teach this stuff is like they've got the wrinkles and the grey hair of the real examples, and going like, yeah, I know it says, you know, yeah, of course, in terms of course you can calculate that as a U value, but you're never going to be able to construct it like that. And I will be coming to site and telling you to rip it up again. And just that I think is so crucial for us to be able to not just get certified buildings or get kind of near Passivhaus or whatever it is, but actually delivering buildings that are repeatedly achieving what we want them to, which is the kind of ultimate goal. So I think so some of the work we're doing at the moment is we have a course which we wrote last year, which is free for all undergraduates that are studying with Ariba University. So that's 60 universities. Not all of them know that it's there. So trying to get that knowledge out there, both to the tutors and also to the students, is really difficult. And I think this is something that when you go into a new environment, you kind of assume you're like, we've got all this amazing stuff and we really want to share it with you, and a lot of it is very practical, which they don't have, you know, from in terms of undergraduates, they have very little understanding, and it's, you know, it's really expensive taking them to site and giving them that learning. And I mean, I think this is exactly our experience, the delivery side as well, is that not everyone has actually got that background of understanding what it really how it really fits together. So loads of real photos, real projects, and stuff which is actual. And so there's that course, which is a kind of a foundation in what you can do from a design perspective to make projects better. And whether they're aiming for Passivhaus or something else, but is like design 101 of what you should be doing. So there's a whole range of...
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, in terms of rolling that out to the architectural students, how have you found the uptake or the adoption of it? Does it seem to be quite popular, or is it still sort of early stage, so it's hard to tell?
So this course was particularly special because this is the first time that a course has been delivered to all universities free of charge. Okay. So usually the universities have to, and that was really important to us because we were really aware that the level of teaching to do with environmental design was quite variable from one university to the other, and we didn't want it to be something that was just for those that could afford it or had an interest. We kind of wanted all the students to have access to it. There are some universities that have really pushed this forward and done a fantastic job of kind of integrating it, and there are others that are still, I don't think, even really know about it. So I would say that now we've got a better understanding of the culture within each university, we are getting a better pickup, and we're able to kind of engage with them much more. But it's slow, and the next step is for us to start talking to the other design related governing bodies, I guess, that so then we can get into their universities. So we've started to talk to SEAT for the architectural technologists, and also we'd like to be talking to SIBSI, and we start getting into all of these things so that course is particularly, we think, is such a good foundation for the whole construction industry. So that's called our bite-sized course, and that's as I said, it's kind of something which is it's also quite helpful. We found clients, if they have a bit of a technical understanding, it helps them to understand what has an impact on energy in use and embodied energy, and also cost of the project, and really being able to control those things and question the project. So that's the kind of main hitter, I guess. We're also, in addition to that, so as part of our scope, we've also started to do more with I've completed colleges, that's it.
Okay.
In addition, so we're really trying to go out and start talking to sectors where so we started off, kind of us talking to other professionals, that's like talking peer to peer. We know exactly, it's very easy for us to engage with them. And I think that we've tried to really push that and start going out into other areas where we have an opportunity to have much greater scale and rollout and things like that. So, but it is difficult, and it's all of these things rely on personal connections and kind of getting people in through the door. And I think that there's also that in trying to get the lessons that we're learning in this kind of little sphere out into the construction, and them to see that these courses are really valuable for them, and not just that there's learning there that we can embed in all of it. And I guess this is what I would really love to see is because from our perspective, seeing the same mistakes made over and over again, which are often not to do with cost, or it's things that aren't usually questioned. And I think that we've got into the habit of questioning everything. And because of that, it's a very pain in the arse, but it means that there's all kinds of things which you can just say, that isn't relevant anymore. Or why the hell are we doing this like this? And I think it's that is, in terms of the scale and the rollout and everything else, I think that's really important. I think there's a lot also that we have, there's a lot both in our teaching and in our design practice that is about efficient use of materials and that I think that balance of in use and upfront energy, I think, is something which we're really well placed to provide support, because at the moment it is we do upfront energy calculations and also kind of whole life energy calculations, and it's very hard at early design stage to say what the impact of this is. And I think that the tools that we're giving are also really relevant for all of that kind of stuff. So there's that side of things. And then there's also really doing it. And again, we have all of our trainers have got a really absolute passion for linking the design up with the construction and trying to kind of bridge that gap, which I think in terms of cost and replication is something that we're really interested in. And coming back to your example about kind of how has the industry changed, I think one of the fantastic examples is what's happened in Scotland with the Passivhaus schools there, where there has been a massive the projects are delivered as design and build, and the requirement has been set in terms of their real energy performance, and that has meant that a lot of the the people that are building these schools have said, well, we need something that's going to give us some confidence that we're going to meet it. And because of that, 2/3 of the schools that are in design or construction in Scotland are going for Passivhaus. There also have been, this has been very much a driver from the client side as well. So Edinburgh Council and other ones have kind of specified this, as well as the contractors coming in and kind of requiring it too. And I think this has really changed. Them seeing the pipeline of work has absolutely changed the landscape, from it being something where there was a lot of, and not just from the contractors, but from the team, a lot of the questioning about, like, why are we doing this? Those questions are kind of gone, and it's all about the how, and particularly they want to know everything in each detail because they want to optimize it. And they're going for constructions that I think are definitely not my favorite at all, but they're like, this is the thing that works for us. And I think this is the bit where it's really exciting. They're kind of grabbing hold of the knowledge, and they're putting their understanding about how to construct stuff, how can they do it repetitively and for a price and everything else. And I think this is just the difference between the one-off projects where the upskilling and learning is a really heavy burden to carry for that one project, and then seeing in this whole kind of ecosystem being created where we have things like the roof insulation contractor coming and talking to us and saying, oh, we need training. And you kind of think that is it's lovely when we get to a point where they want to engage in the conversation, and that feels really exciting to me. So I think it feels like it can be like terrifying what we need to do, but at the same time I'm amazed at the rate of change when we need it to happen. We just need that impetus, I guess.
I completely agree. I think so. I mentioned to someone else about the schools, the target, and the fact that previous to the designer course, I attended a 6-week Passivhaus, I think it's Passivhaus Trust, organised seminars on specific to schools and Passivhaus adoption in schools. I remember saying to Rebecca, I was like, why are they all in Scotland? And then I realised that's the reason why, and it's as simple as that. I do believe as well, like in this industry, we just need the right targets, right? We need the right targets, the right outcomes. And my dream would be to replicate that same process in England, Wales, for all the building types, because then that will mean that, people like ourselves who are saying we should do this for this reason, it becomes embedded into the requirements. And as you say, like the first one might be a learning curve and might be difficult for different reasons. As you say, interesting what you said about the replicability of the construction, because for example, we do kind of like what you said at the beginning, which was unusual, which is like, the flat slab construction or the continental frame construction, where we have like a lot of in situ concrete, and developing, as you say, like those details for that type of construction. Yes, at the start, you might have to redo processes that maybe you didn't do initially to meet certain other requirements, but then you learn from it, you can do it again. And I think everyone's better off from it, aren't they? Because you're delivering a better building. So I completely agree. It's like I don't know. I was talking to Sarah about this in the last interview about the momentum and change, and how we think we're getting there, and there's different bodies who are pushing for the clients to change their requirements. So yeah, I think it's going in the right direction, isn't it? But I think we need a bit more power in the top level of requiring this, and maybe funding mechanisms and stuff like that. Perhaps.
I mean, I think we have to be careful with all that, Peter. I guess that it's the thing that I want to take, I guess, is that I want to feel empowered, and I want other people who care about stuff to also feel empowered. And I think that it's very easy for us to say what we need is someone over there to change. And I guess that what I'm interested in is, obviously that would be fabulous, and those people have got an awful lot more control over the situation than I do. But what I'm really interested in is what have I got control over, and what can I make change. And on our projects, even they're both it may be that there is very little that you can do, but there are always tweaks and there are always changes and impacts that you can have on the real building performance, whether anyone notices or not, or whether it's calculated. I still think there are both design decisions and things that go on site that we all have an impact on. And I think that we need to so I'm not that's what I want to be involved in, I guess. And even on our projects where and even when we have projects where the client has committed to Passivhaus, but it may be that the type of construction that they want is particularly high embodied energy or something along those lines that doesn't sit totally right with me, or say that they're going for like they've chosen a heat pump which has got like a mad global warming potential refrigerant in it, and I'm just like, this isn't really, I don't feel comfortable about this. Or they've got a hot water system that's just sat there chugging away all the time and kind of dribbling out heat to their system. I think in those situations, there are still things that I can do and still bits of learning that I can either help people with maybe, or things where I have some agency. And I think that is, and I think this is why it's like we need the knowledge and we also need the right attitude in terms of feeling like we have control, because it's very easy for us to get to a place where it's either blamey or it's fear, and it feels like and I think this is kind of how, looking at the current situation at the moment, we are, it is absolutely horrific, and at the same time, I think it would be very easy for us to say all is lost and it's not worthwhile doing anything. And I would feel really sad about that. And I still think we've got a chance, and I think it's worth gunning for it. And that's it basically. So we need to go with a real attitude that there are things that we can have, and at the very least that we can feel like we were part, trying to show what could be possible. So I think that's what so whilst I really want all those things to change, and I completely agree, I feel really jealous that it's just Scotland, and actually in terms of the number of schools they do is quite small, but it's like we could just do that, and it really the scale, if we did that in England and Wales, would just be phenomenal. Like it would be the cost and everything else would just kind of come down. I think there is still things that I hope we can do without that happening.
Yeah, you want to do it the right way, don't you? You want to have the right advocacy. I completely get where you're coming from, and it's interesting because I think you saying that, it kind of in my experience of, we're working on a few Passivhaus projects, but certainly the feel I got from the course and in terms of the other trainers and also the people who are the consultancies that either dedicate 90-100% of their work to Passivhaus projects, or those that work in larger consultancies but are the focus in terms of the Passivhaus design. I think it's quite notable and quite unique in that I do find that Passivhaus designers and the people who are really passionate, they really go above the parapet, and like they it's almost like, there might be other consultants or other certain people with different specialisms that might say, right, we've spent all our fee now, so I'm sorry, we can't. And it's like, I do get that sense from Passivhaus. It's like I want to do the right thing, I want to make it work, and sometimes I'm like, I think they've done more work than maybe their fee. Not that I'm not taking it in particular, but maybe just generally that's the feel I get, and I love that, because that's certainly the way I try to look at it. And it's like, okay, if I need to go on site 2 days next week, or if I have to look at these 3 other details that weren't anticipated, I'll do it, because I do want to make it perform. And honestly, I'm very impressed. That's part of the reason why I kind of wanted to push it out there a bit more, is that there is this community of people and I think you're right, from the ground up, pushing it forward, educating those, like with the designer course, for example, there's a lot of building physics, a lot of math stuff I had to revisit or that I never learned. But actually what's really interesting is it gives you that appreciation of what you do have to look at, which is different from let's say, doing a building regulation model and ticking things off and looking at certain things. You're looking at the science behind it. You're looking at everything in it, and it gives you that appreciation of what's really important, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm sure that is the way. Let's not worry about client requirements. Let's push it. It's
It's
almost like you're
stealth.
being
Yeah.
you're almost being like a, not a role model, but you're being that force, and you want to bring people with you, but you want to bring the people who want to be there, not just the ones who are like, well, we have to do this, so okay,
And I
let's
think
do
this
it.
is what's so I mean, I think about that all that, and it's like slightly cringy that we're the ones that are like geeking out. And at the same time, there's a bit of it that's like, that's because we are, if you think there's value in what you're doing, it all becomes really interesting and it becomes absolutely fascinating. And you're like, and there's an awful lot of that then you want to tell other people, because you're like, I found out this amazing thing. Did you know that I don't know, like the fences, the impact on the shading of this is that, or, you know, actually we only care about orientation is about summertime, wintertime, it doesn't really matter. So there's lots of things that from both that doing that work, it becomes really fascinating. And I think this is where, when I have friends that say, like, what do you do? And I'm like, oh, well, mostly I just look at insulation. And it both feels like something that you're like, bloody hell, how have I made a whole job out of this? And at the same time, there's still so much where I really want to understand it. And I feel like the level of knowledge that I don't have it's just fascinating. You know, there's so much that is out there. We're doing a lot on we've got a couple of leisure centres at the moment, and they are absolutely fascinating. And I think that from doing those for new build, every time I go to a leisure centre, I'm like, I could instantly make this so much more efficient and kind of save money and make it so there's all these bits and pieces that you're kind of constantly learning. And I think that I really see that in the teams that are working on it, and particularly what's the thing that I feel really excited about is that on the projects that we have on site, the difference in attitude to the teams. I mean, there are always people where they're like, I don't like change, it's not for me. That's totally fine. You can go and work somewhere else. Thank you very much. But for a lot of people where they have been, a lot of their work is very much, it's paid on a piecemeal basis, and it's all about speed and no one actually cares about anything else, is that there was a ground worker that worked on St Sidwell's, which is the first leisure centre in the UK, who said, this is the first time in 12 years that I've been proud of the work that I've done. And you just think this is a real shame. Like, we want people to come into construction because it's like an awesome place to work. And I think that we have that opportunity to turn it into that as well. And by the focus on quality and people taking pride in their work, I think is incredibly, you don't really need any other sales pitch. That's kind of what we want to be showing. And I think this is particularly important when we're looking at retrofit, is we don't want it to be a race to the bottom. And I think a lot of our current approach about just going and putting it in a factory really freaks me out, I think, because what we've seen in terms of, we've done quite a lot of work with timber frame factories, but other factories that are kind of creating panels and system build things. And I would say that all of the issues that we have on site are exacerbated in a factory. And it's in terms of quality of product, in terms of thermal performance, we're paying an awful lot for something that is just not delivering. And I think that we also, the staff that are there, they tend to have a much higher turnover of staff than you tend to have on a building site.
In like the factories.
So the people that are working in the factories, and they, I think, again, I mean, I agree that we are going to end up with a lot of that happening, but we also need to turn it into an actual career, and we need to turn it into something where we're not treating them like robots, but they are skilled operatives and they're doing something that's worthwhile. And I'm not sure that is how, in terms of not just about the individual organisations, this is talking about more as our kind of policy outlook on why we are going for a lot of prefabricated components. I think there's a real we need to see this as something very different, and that's why I'm so interested in the education. I think this kind of comes back to the education bit, is actually getting people to them having that agency means that they can really feel a part of it and think that they're contributing to something that's better.
Yeah, because they're just doing the factory panels, and then they're just shipping it off. They're not seeing the end product and maybe appreciating. I mean, we can go into, but I guess when you're talking about the issues, is it because the panels are, in terms of the quality of the panels, they're different from each other, or is it more to do with, or in addition, is it to do with the way that you connect it to the what's on site and the air tightness lines and things like that? Is it?
So those things have been difficult, but that thing is ultimately tested, and that a lot of that connection is happening on site. The main issues that we've come across, and there are people that are doing a really good job of this, but I'd say that there's an awful lot of putting things in the box, putting a lid on it, and no one actually checking what's there. And so when we've come along and opened it up, and inside is a lot more timber than was anticipated, and massive bits of gaps and also shapes that are just actually really difficult to insulate. So it's like they're being asked to do a really difficult job. They've got a very tight time frame to do it under, and no one's checking what they're doing. And they didn't really understand the impact of having massive gaps in there anyway. So they're like, well, I did the best that I could. Yeah. So it's totally understandable, but it's all of those things need to change, and I think it needs to start off with the design process. And we've seen the same in factories where they're doing steel frame, like lightweight steel frame, and very, very similar things of there being a real the structural integrity of it is that they're very hot on, but everything else not so much. So it's a promise of something that is supposed to be really high quality, but unless we really interrogate that system and work out how to make it from a process perspective, how we can get the consistency of quality and really address the issues to do with buildability in a similar way that we would expect to do on a site-based activity, then we're not going to end up with something that is a quality product out the end of it.
That's so interesting, because I think the big sell on like MMC and prefabrication is the quality aspect, and it's the example of, okay, well, it's when you're manufacturing a car, similar factory process, it's controlled, it's quality assured, we're led to believe, and yeah, it's really interesting that your experiences are very different in some cases. So yeah,
I think that's it. It's exactly. It's in some cases. It's not it's kind of the assumption that will always be the case. And actually, when you go and have a look around, the level of automation from one factory to another is very different. And I'm not saying that more automation is necessarily a good thing as well. I think that this is really about what we would like to see, and what I've seen in the best cases is where they've looked at how are they going to get the consistent results, and how is that checked, and kind of setting up the whole process for success. And I think that often the lack of understanding about how thermal performance is impacted is so significant that they're not even aware of what the problems are. So it hasn't been raised, and then the systems haven't been designed with that in mind as well. So they're like, yep, we've put some insulation in, tick, on to the next.
And are we talking specifically, Sally, about things like the penetrations into the facade and that kind of element that's basically undermining the whole system, or is more?
So I'll give you an example of with timber frame panels. There may be that say that it's just a single stud timber frame. So we've got timber, we've got like a layer of kind of the inner skin of it. Say that's like an OSB board or something or other on the inside. And then we've got the layer which is the insulation and the timber, and so we'll have a load of timber in there which is there for the structural integrity, and then insulation between it, and then we'll have some kind of thing on the outside that might be like a CP board or something like that, something that's just like an outside, again, another kind of board on the outside. So this will they'll make up the timber frame, and then they'll put the OSB on, and then it'll be ready to put the insulation in. When this happens, that insulation will probably be the cheapest thing that they can get hold of. So it might be something like, it hasn't been specifically considered what a good fit it is for that. And actually, whilst on the drawings it will look like there's just timber going straight through, so we're just trying to fill these rectangular gaps. Actually, because of various lifting eyes and other things that will come into it, there's bits where there's timbers that don't go all the way through, so it's not a rectangular shape, it's actually a kind of weird shape like this. And there's a window head here, so there's a lintel there, and there's this. So actually, even if they've got something which is like a nice rigid bat of insulation, they're having to cut it. And often the thickness of those layers where there is, say, the lintel coming in, is not going to be the same thickness as the insulation. So they're kind of left to fit these things together, and then you naturally end up with a gap. Or it might be that there's like a box beam and they're supposed to put insulation into it, but it's a real headache because they go and make that over here, and actually the insulation is right at the other end of the factory. So they just kind of put this together, and they'll go like, but this is, so it's, there's various bits. So I'd say the major thing is that what we tend to find is quite significant gaps in insulation in there, but a lot of them are not, because they just haven't been thought through. So, and also there is limited their systems are often not set up to give us an indication about the total amount of timber in there, which is it's very difficult to get hold of that, because the panel is built up of kind of multiple things going on, and not all of those are easily trackable. And they often end up, because each panel has to have timber around the edge of it as well, to the structural part of it, to kind of hold it all together. It means that we can end up with quite significantly greater timber in there in comparison to the alternatives. So all these things can be fixed. And there are examples of companies that are doing a really good job of that on a range of scales, but it's not common, I guess. And
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think there were a lot of examples of timber construction in the course, and from my background, and what we do is quite different, because it's all concrete, and like we generally, I think our experience and the things that I try to get a lot involved in alongside my facade colleagues is, because we use predominantly either steel or concrete frame, it's more those ties. So whether it's steel tie from the floor to the facade, and how is that, and balconies, oh no, if it's a balcony, how do we do the thermal breaks and that kind of stuff. So I think from my perspective, kind of adding on to what you're saying is that what you're saying previously is looking at things in a different way, because before, like, I have from an energy modeling background, building physics, looking at overheating, look at operational energy, but then when you have that Passivhaus understanding on top of that, you do look at additional things like a proper, let's say, U-value calculation, taking into account the proportion of the steel because it's conductive. Whereas I think 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that's very important. But then you understand the science, and it's like, of course, when you know that, it's
that's a couple of millimeters. Do we really need to? And I think it's really, I think this, applying it to different, I think the PHPP modelling and this approach means that applying it in different construction techniques is both, I think it really gives you some really solid tools to be able to work out what's important. And you start worrying about things which are, on the face of it, can seem quite small, but actually once you start to pull it apart and unravel it, it becomes really quite significant. So I think we've done quite a lot in and around steel frame, and I think it's like you need to completely change around the design process as to when various activities happen, because there is such a strong reliance on the thermal bridging and the different solutions that, and quite often what's really interesting is that it's not always trying to develop strategies so that it's not so that we're what am I trying to say, that there's the solutions are sometimes really surprising. So one of the ones that was really fantastic that was on came out of doing Agar Grove was on the previous project of that Chester Balmore, which had been, it was a concrete frame building, so there wasn't, but we had a full fill cavity because it had bricks on the outside and it had brick hangers, and the brick hangers were like the fanciest thing that we could possibly get. And we had, like, because there was loads of thermal bridging, because that design was very, very complicated. So we had cavities that were like, I think there was something like 250 mil thick. So everything was like a special. And what was so lovely about going on to Agar which was a follow-on project, another housing project, again, concrete frame, brick on the outside. The planner said that absolutely had to be. It was like 6 stories high, the first block. And the structural engineer said, there is this point that below 200 mil, that suddenly the thermal bridges all become much, much less, because we're not trying to kind of hang something really far out of the building. And that kind of advice about then going for something that it meant that the brick supports that we ended up with were far more of a kind of standard solution, and it didn't so the conductivity of each brick support was greater, but because we'd managed to jiggle the other things, it meant that there was an awful lot less of them. And so you can end up with something that is not as you anticipate, or using a product that would not usually be fit. You kind of think, is this really all right in a passive house? But actually, that overall getting the balance right of everything else, it means that you can open up opportunities as well. So, and that's the bit that I think is really exciting, is kind of saying, well, how can we use the least of this product? And I think that's the bit where those constraints, and what was so nice then about that project and it was that then that was what set everything else, was that the cavity had to be 200 mil. And then because of that, it was like, we have to make everything around the side work for this. And it just came up with some really lovely solutions because of that. And a lot of that work was archetype with the Passive House consultants working alongside that. And also they were the delivery architects for that. So really good.
That's really interesting. And it goes into a lot more of so even the structural solution can be altered. And I think 2 things come to me. One is, I remember we were bidding for a project a couple of years ago, and it was a listed building in London, education building, quite high spec architecture, Enefit project. But because as you know, it's listed, so you had to insulate internally. And I remember the cavity was 400 mil. And the kind of spec of the kind of brick hanger that was required, I think there was more heat loss from just those hangers than there was from all of the external walls, or even, it was so severe, if you like. So I guess that's an even more extreme example of if you have that kind of constraint, that is I suppose the downside, or something you have to consider, that maybe if you were to look at it in a more simplified way, we're just adding 100 mil insulation on the inside, no problem. It's like, no, the cavity is thick and it requires these huge brick hangers, etc. And I guess the second thing I'm thinking of as well is the importance of form factor, right? Because if you lower the form factor, you can, as a byproduct, you don't need as much insulation because the form is more efficient, and it gives opportunities, doesn't it? Like reducing that cavity and therefore almost making it more efficient in terms of the way the structure is, I guess. So it's kind of, I suppose it's things that we wouldn't necessarily normally think of, but it's good things to have in the back of your mind to have during workshops, to suggest an efficient way of doing it.
Definitely. And I think that, I think that example, the Enefit project, is really interesting as well, in terms of those things where you kind of step back and you go, is this actually the right thing for us to be doing? And I think this is designing to any single target, it's just an oversimplification, and there's a multitude of things. And I think that we really need to be questioning stuff and saying, what's wrong? What has gone wrong that means that we've come up with this solution? Or maybe it is right, but we need to really pick it apart and decide. And I think that's, I love that kind of inquiring brain. And there's always things afterwards you're like, ah, damn it, if only I'd seen that afterwards, kind of knowing that stuff is also can be really painful as well. Like we've done a lot of that. But I would say that if you have a good form factor, you're paying for a lot less surface area to insulate and to deal with, So this has such a fundamental impact on the cost, on the embodied energy. All of these things are a kind of key driver. And I think that I'll just link into that, because I think one of the things that we also are absolutely obsessed with is the level of complexity that we put in, and the particularly junction details, and how many different junction details we have on a project, and that opportunity to standardize and make it as simple as possible, and therefore trying to use resources efficiently, so we're not having to cut half of it and kind of throw the rest in the skip. I think there's so much that is in early stage design around that, which is it's quite difficult to make it into something tangible. So one of the things that we do is doing like measuring the lengths of junctions, and at early stages when it's still very blocky, and kind of showing how it's different from one project to the next. And there's a lovely quote from Nick Grant, which is like, you get 4 corners for free and everything else you have to pay for. And I just love that idea that it's not saying that you can't have it, but you have to justify it. Yeah, exactly. That's it. Like, you have to think that this is actually, you have to make sure that this is a worthwhile thing that you're putting in. And I think there are, this is exactly the stuff which is really simple, but also trying to apply it is really tricky, and has trying to bring it into the other design decisions that are going on at that time, I think is it's not an insignificant task. So yeah, but worthwhile, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely it's worthwhile. And what's the reception of architects, I suppose, because I know that there's sometimes that interaction of the aesthetic and how, I suppose, sometimes if you reduce the number of the corners, because you only have your three corners, like how does that interact with design? I imagine there's a varied adoption. Some are absolutely on board, and then maybe some are thinking more towards the visual.
So I would put architects out there as being some of the most receptive out of the design and construction team.
Yeah.
And I would say that there are individuals, and I think it's always hard when they've drawn something and then you're like, red pen all over, none of this. And it feels quite reductive. So this is why getting that training in there to start with is really important, because it means that they can see that as a mechanism for them to go forward, as opposed to them someone else coming and taking away all their toys, which is obviously they hate that, it's no surprise. So it does need a different way of thinking. I would say that there's no like categorizing any different groups and different professionals. I would say that also the other group, contractors, are often given a really bad rep, like, oh, no one's going to want to tender for this, like, oh, they really don't. And and at an early stage in a project, usually the project manager is like, because they're like, I just don't want the stress of like something different, that they'll say like, oh, well, we don't think anyone's going to be interested. And I've heard that so many times, and it's such a shame. So a lot of the work that we try and do is say, well, can we keep it in there and then have like a back pocket plan, which is to downgrade some of the spec if we need to, if we find that it's unaffordable, and still all the really good design stuff is still baked in. Because I think this is one of what's so good about having a limit, is it puts that constraint on, it puts a lid on the project, okay, and it means that you have to pay for the things so where you have got lots of complex stuff, you have to pay for it in added insulation or whatever else it is. You have to make it balance. And I think that really focuses the mind of the designers, and but then, yeah, as I said, so if you don't have that, if you have like a back door that's like kind of like, oh well, we'll just try and get to somewhere near Passivhaus, then I think that can be very quickly, it starts running away with itself and just kind of boils over. So yeah, definitely having some cap during design is incredibly valuable, even if at a point where during the tender period or something else, there are alternatives proposed, and there's kind of other way if it's not financially viable. And certainly I'd say that on our own projects as well, we've considered that. So it's something that you kind of design to, but if you can't afford it, there's other things you can do, or there's ways that you can put it in and say, well, actually, we're just going to put double glazing in. We haven't got any particularly large windows on this project. And it means that, so we can be kind of comfortable that the comfort is going to be okay, but the cost difference is enough for it to still be viable. And it's still an option to replace those in 30 years when those windows need replacing as well. So I think there's approaches of getting there with low risk, and that's the bit where, from my perspective, those are the projects that I think is really interesting. But it's very much I think this, again, it comes back to personal power, and in those situations where it feels like everyone is against you and you're trying to do something better, I think trying to work out how can you stack this so it's got the best chance, I think is really important.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think, yeah, the bad rap about contractors, like, I think from my perspective, it's like, I want low energy buildings. That's my why, if you like. And I think what's really great, I think, about Passivhaus and the way that we've tried to approach it as a contractor, but I think just as a mindset, is definitely like focusing a lot more on quality and not necessarily seeing Passivhaus, maybe 10 years ago, it'd be like, well, okay, we know that's 10 to 15% extra capex. It's like, but actually, when you break it down, it's not simple like that. Yes, you may have to have, I think, triple glazing, which may, as the building regs and everything progresses, that's becoming more and more the case anyway. But yes, you have to have a Passivhaus certified glazing unit, which I learned on the course was really interesting. Is a lot of the theories to do with internal temperature and ensuring, other benefits are provided, such as thermal comfort in winter and no condensation risk and other things like that. But yeah, when you weigh up all of the so-called extra capex, it's not as simple. It's not as simple as that, because you deliver a quality product, your reputation is more likely to be improved, or when you deliver something that's quality, it's received well. And I think there are so many benefits to just approaching it in a different way. And interestingly, is we're doing a project that's Passivhaus, and the complying with Part L regulations is more difficult, just due to different factors, due to the building type and other factors. And that's where it becomes really frustrating, because it's like, we're doing the right thing. We've had the Passivhaus certifier. We have a great Passivhaus designer, we have a great Passivhaus certifier, and they've both looked and said, more or less, like, this is great, this has got on the right track, it's stage 2. And then you've got the regulation, and it's like the carbon reduction is not where you want it, and we know why. And it's like, we're trying to, like, fight that battle, really. So it's interesting that almost like something that seems to be the thing that's more difficult is actually the thing that's fine, and it's actually these other things as unintended consequence, if you like. So I feel like we're in quite a weird place right now with policy and requirements and things like that. I don't know if you found similar, and maybe some of the jobs that you're doing, you're starting to get that, or maybe you've always had that, conflict.
I think you're absolutely right. It's like, if you get all those early design decisions right, then you're not reliant on super high spec stuff. So you don't need to have Passivhaus certified windows in a Passivhaus. And I think that one of the great things about the PHPP software that we do a lot is that you can look at a range of different products and look at their cost and look at what the impact is for your project how they sit from a performance perspective. So it means that you can make sure you can choose things, particularly windows, but other products as well, based on the bespoke nature of your project. So where it is, what type of thing it is, the building design exactly for your project, and only pay for the thing that is the optimum. But as you say, then we've got this kind of blanket requirements of our building regulations, which aren't really necessarily tuned to our buildings. So where we're sat in terms of our thermal performance, and particularly again coming back to Agar on Block A, where we had 150 mil of insulation in the cavity, and because of that, it meant that that it didn't comply with our building regulations, which is quite mad. And I mean, interesting. I think there are opportunities for us to discuss this as well. I mean, to me, we're doing quite a lot of retrofit work, and looking at one of the projects that we've got is a school building built in 2012, and which is basically what we're building now. And we've done a bit of the Passivhaus consultants Delta Q have done some going and kind of ripping some of the walls apart to have a look at what's there and the floor and everything else, because we said we really need to understand what we've got. There is insulation in there, but what the hell is it what's it doing? And it's actually been built really well, but there's an awful lot of things that are inherent within the design that mean that this building will never perform. So it's a steel frame, a lot of it is single story, and we have the steel frame, it overhangs. So we have kind of really long eaves, and the steel goes all the way out to the outside, and then it has insulation on the top of that. And because of this, it's in quite an exposed location. You can imagine we're getting wind whipping underneath the insulation, which is beautiful. Really well put together thing. This is part of it. It's like it, but it is, and actually trying to deal with that, because that steel is connected to every other part of the building. It's kind of like this mad web inside. So it's not like there isn't one place where you can say, if we just cut it off there and kind of made that bit wind tight, then it would solve it, because it's just everywhere. So this is the importance of us looking at our new build. Getting that right is because trying to retrofit the stuff we're doing now, I'd say, is some of the hardest retrofit problems that we have. And it's it's really, it is that's the really high cost, high risk stuff, is those things. And this, I mean, in this particular building, they did some thermal imaging of the inside, and the surfaces were really cold, and that's because of all of the thermal bypass that was going on, where we had kind of wind blowing through, and the insulation is just sat there doing nothing. So we need to, this is why I'm so interested in the not just applying this stuff to buildings that are labelled as Passivhaus, but doing it for everything, and everyone having an understanding about how buildings fail and what we should be doing to make sure that doesn't happen.
That's so frustrating, because I think the project you're talking about, but because of the fact that you can see that they did a good job in terms of, like, the insulation was fantastic, the design sounded complicated, and it looked visually stunning, as you're saying. So it's like, if they just had that extra bit of someone saying, okay, that will happen, so just do this, and just make sure that as you say, the thermal bypass, that's so frustrating, because it's like they're just given the wrong playbook. It's like they were given the IQ instructions for the wrong cabinet. They should have done, if they were given these different ones, it would have been so much better. And I think that's where, like, from my point of view, it's just frustration about getting the right, I guess, plan, or just getting the right thing to start with. And it's also interesting what you're saying about retrofits, because I know when I did my master's, I was very passionate about retrofit and trying to understand, because I remember at uni when I was doing civil engineering, and there was a lecture about saying how 80% of the building stock in the current year, so I don't know, it was like 2012 or something, will still be there in 2050. And to me, it was like, wow, that's amazing, because, sorry, that's a huge opportunity to retrofit on a large scale the building stock, And you know, growing up in a really cold house, I firsthand I realized like, oh yeah, that's why this is cold, and that's why blah blah blah. And it is interesting what you're saying about how on retrofit it is a lot more of a challenge. And I think certainly from how I've learned about things, I completely agree, because I think you can't just insulate the main wall and maybe change a couple of the windows. You're still going to have those inherent problems of thermal bridging, thermal bypass, mold growth, all that stuff, unless you really have a full building approach. And I guess on a large scale, I don't know, is that a challenge too far in the UK? Like, what's your feeling about the existing building stock and how we can lower the energy?
So I think it's difficult not to feel depressed about the lack of action about this. And I think there's a really interesting work that that is being done, particularly I'd say that the stuff that Alan Clark has done through the Passivhaus Trust, and previous to that the ACB, but particularly the last stuff he did about kind of when to put heat pumps in, and this balancing act of heat pumps versus fabric measures, and how we balance all of how we get the right mix, and particularly what should we be doing there's like, what should be the long-term aim, which is to do a really good job of retrofitting our buildings so that they're comfortable and they're healthy and they're really low energy, and what can we do in the next 5 years that will make a really serious dent in our carbon emissions. And these are kind of two quite different things that we're trying to achieve. And I think that the longer term bit, which is about doing a really good job of retrofitting, which also includes our heat pumps and everything else, I think that is, everyone's kind of fairly set that that is a thing that we should be doing. But what we do first, I think, is much more of that's the tangly bit and the difficult bit. I would say that there is, it also, this is coming back to the people that we have in construction. I think this is where we need to be really careful not to just do a race to the bottom. And I think that the skill level of the people that are actually doing the work is, because it's unlike in a new build where once you're out the ground, hopefully there's an awful lot of control over what happens. With retrofit, there's all kinds of things. You know, every time you lift up a floorboard, you're like, oh, crikey, I wasn't expecting that to be there. And then you're like, right, okay, our whole plan needs to be reviewed because this just isn't going to work. And so it needs a real attitude and a kind of an interest in solving problems, which luckily, you know, human beings are really well suited to this. But it's certainly the way we set up the contracts and the way that we engage with the client, and the whole team has got to be quite different for us to manage a success. And no matter how many pattern books there are that are generated, you can guarantee that whatever the detail is that you have on your building has never been done before, because we have this whole mad construction system, which is part of what I loved coming into it, where every building's different. Yeah. So, and people have added onto it as well. So it's not, and what they built that out of, and is it, what do we know about it? So I think there's on the one hand, it can be so scary looking at existing buildings that it means that you do nothing. Like, it just feels, particularly when you get into the looking at the risks to do with moisture and everything else, I think that it's very easy to feel overwhelmed and to look at the failures and go, we just, you know, we can't do anything, it's just too much, and maybe we'll just, you know, kind of, I think we'll just close the door on that one. But actually, I think this also is something that I think there's a huge opportunity for us to demonstrate in the construction industry that we can do a good job of this. And I think we just need some kind of different setups for most of it. So, and there are clients that are really keen and looking at this from an estate basis, and I think that is really exciting. And in terms of the question about like a fabric versus heat pumps and when to do things, I think that with every project, we must have a long-term plan for it. So even if we're doing just one part of the puzzle now, and the solution as to how far to go before you get that heat pump in. So the whole thing is that if we just replace our existing stock with heat pumps, then the running cost of them is going to be, so our carbon emissions will be generally, we'll get a big down on that, but our and also we're not doing anything with the actual building, which there's all kinds of, I mean, every single project that we've been involved in that's been a retrofit, there are maintenance issues that have not been addressed. That means that there are things that are just that need sorting out anyway, that aren't anything to do with the retrofit, but the cost of that is lumbered in with the retrofit as well. And they're like, this costs so much more. And it was like, well, hang on a minute, your building was not in a fit state to be retrofitted in the first place. So there's an awful lot going into it, which is sorting out inherent problems to do with the quality of our building stock and kind of what we've done with it. Which is, it's very frustrating when you know this stuff and then you go and have a look around a home that other people think is incredibly valuable and you're like, yeah, but this is crap. The best thing you can do with this is kind of get the bulldozer. So it's quite, there's some kind of interesting tangents there. But I definitely, on the whole, I feel quite positive about it. And I think it's something where the frustration is not starting, and I think that there is a really good level of knowledge out there, and I think that the Passive House community has got a lot to offer in terms of that, working out what's worthwhile doing, and we just need to start cracking on with it, really.
100%. It is interesting what you're saying about, that there are a lot of unique constructions in the UK with regards to the older building stock and how you deal with those problems. I'm sure, like in the first few years, the learning curve, new build might be that, and then retrofit might be even a steeper learning curve because there's so many complexities, as you said, and so many unique examples. But I suppose, the more you do that, if we're thinking about training and training our workforce in the UK to deal with the problems of the future, why not have that as the basis of your training, is dealing with these quite difficult projects? Because there will be learning, and there are, although they may be unique at the start, I suppose in the longer term, like 5 or 10 years, we'll have a database of understanding, okay, this type of construction, this is how, this is a good solution to deal with it. And there can start to become a few efficiencies in the design system where we have more knowledge, we have more understanding. It's not always, an experiment, right? Like the first time, this house was built in the 1920s, let's have a look under the floorboards, that kind of thing.
Totally. And I think that's exactly, I guess, in terms of our approach of looking at a retrofit is so different now. And we've started to get some of that systematic approach to it and starting to really understand what the big hitters are that we need to understand. But so we're kind of doing some of that from a design perspective. We just need to get to a point where there is the knowledge bank is so much greater around all of this stuff. And I think that the opportunities for scale in terms of clients that hold on to a stock, for them to be able to look at how they have those connections with, so that the putting things in place like the training of how you do something to a good quality is really worth it, and that they get the value back from that, I think, is being able to demonstrate the pipeline. And I think it's been really interesting as part of the work that there's a Plymouth retrofit task force, which is kind of people in the industry that are working on it, and the up and down funding and not having a long pipeline of work, it's very hard for people to come into this industry and see a career in it. So I think this is definitely me moaning about someone else as opposed, but I think this is something which would be really nice. If I could have one thing, is to see that pipeline of quality work coming out. I think that then the response to it would just be phenomenal, and I'm sure that we start getting into, exactly as you say, those efficiencies and starting to work out the kind of the constant learning. And I think this is something where we've really seen that on the journey of people in the Passive House community who have really learn from each project, and it's like refining their art of it, and that's really exciting. And I think is the opportunity there is just phenomenal, and yeah, really something that is where we get the kind of the rate of change happen in a very different way.
Wonderful. I'm conscious of time, Sally. I don't take all your time, so thank you so much. I really appreciate your time and your insights. I found it incredibly fascinating, and yeah, like keep doing what you're doing. Push it from the ground up, as you say, and I think everything you've said about the modules and the architectural programs and all that kind of stuff, I just think is amazing. So thank you for this time, and thank you for all that you do to, you know, push the good word of Passivhaus to the menu, right?
Oh, it's lovely, and it's really nice to hear. Like, I think having that your interest and kind of, I think that it's really lovely to have. We need that variety. We need the whole team around us to make a success of it, and it's the bit that makes it really fun. So yeah, more please.
All right, I'll stop it there. Perfect.